Good evening, welcome. I'm John. I'm a bookseller at Literati bookstore in downtown Ann Arbor, Michigan. We're so pleased to welcome Sara Goudarzi in support of the Almond in the Apricot in conversation this evening with Amy Poeppel. Just a quick webinar overview for our attendees. The chat is closed this evening, but you can keep the chat window open as I'll be sharing links to purchase the book from Literati throughout the event. The Q&A is available to you, however, that's at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to submit any questions you may have tonight at any time, and I'll read a selection of those questions at the conclusion of the conversation. And live transcription is available on your toolbar as well using the CC button. If you're watching us later on YouTube, there are always links to purchase books in the description directly below me. In the corner of the video, you'll also see a little typewriter subscribe button. You can subscribe to our videos to be kept up to date with all of our At Home with Literati events when they become available on our channel. And as a reminder, you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. And if you live in Southeast Michigan or the Ann Arbor area, of course, our doors are open to the public for in-store shopping. But most of all, we would just like to thank you for your attendance this evening or this afternoon or this morning or much later this evening, depending on when and where in the world you may be joining us. So without further ado, I'll introduce tonight's author and our interlocutor. Sara Goudarzi's work has appeared in the New York Times, Scientific American, National Geographic News, The Adirondack Review, and Drunken Boat, among others. She is the author of Layla's Day at the Pool and Amazing Animals from Scholastic Inc. Sara has taught writing at NYU and is a 2017 Writers in Paradise Les Standiford Fellow and a Tin House alumna. Born in Tehran, she grew up in Iran, Kenya, and the US, and currently lives in Brooklyn. And Amy Poeppel is the award-winning author of the novels The Sweet Spot, Musical Chairs, Limelight, and Small Admissions. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Rumpus, Literary Hub, and Working Mother. She and her husband have 3 sons and split their time between New York City, Germany, and Connecticut. Please join me in welcoming Sara Goudarzi and Amy Poeppel into your living rooms.
Thank you. Thank you so much, John. And thank you, Sara, for inviting me to get to talk to you about this beautiful book that you've written. As John said, the link to Sara's book is going to be in the chat window. So please do your best to support Literati and get this beautiful book if you have not purchased it already. And if you have purchased it already, buy a copy for a friend or pick up another book and support this incredible independent bookstore. So Sara, thank you so much for letting me talk to you about this incredible book that you've written.
Thank you so much for doing this. I'm so excited to see you, especially after 2 years of not having seen you. How is that?
I know, I've missed you. I've missed you actually. And what the audience might not know is that we have actually teamed up together to write humor pieces together, which kind of saved me during lockdown because we worked on quite a few things, some of which got published and some didn't, but we always give it our best shot. And you're a great writing partner and very funny. It's definitely been fun. So for anyone watching, if they have not read your book, how would you describe The Almond in the Apricot to a reader?
I don't know why that's such a tough question to answer, but it is. I think I would say it's a story of a woman who kind of thought she had a pretty good life. And when a piece of that life kind of breaks off, the whole thing sort of crumbles. And she starts to have nightmares of living in a war-stricken landscape as a young girl, whose world has also been destabilized. And the protagonist can't tell what's real and what's not. And I guess at the heart of it, it's an exploration of love, grief, the connections we make, and it's really the end of one friendship and the beginning of another.
Yes, and you do grief beautifully and in a way that is just really heartbreaking. I mean, the loss that this main character has experienced is something that you really feel when you're reading the book. You've got this very interesting narrative structure. Is that the thing that came first for you, or what was sort of the element of this book that I mean, because I remember talking to you about this book quite a long time ago. And so what was the thing that really sort of brought the whole thing together for you?
Yeah, so I wrote the first 2 chapters pretty much as they are now. And so I wrote the first chapter in the voice of the young girl and the second chapter in the voice of the young woman. And I had no idea what the story was about. I had no idea what I was going to do with it, but I knew it had to be in that structure. And I didn't know what the connective tissue between these 2 narratives were. So it was kind of like an exploration. I mean, I don't know how people write their first books, but I think you really just, a lot of it is just trial and error. And I didn't have an outline. I just like the first 2 chapters and okay, this is my structure and I'm going to explore and see what the story is about. And I think the connective tissue ended up being the protagonist's best friend's death.
Yes. And it's so interesting as a reader because we have that same experience when we're reading it. We don't know what the connective tissue is at the beginning either. And it's fascinating to find out what the link is between Emma and Lily. So these 2 voices, which are so distinct and so well wrought, do you want to give a little reading so that we can get a taste of your 2 narrators?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just start with the first chapter because it's like an easy entry point and a little bit of the second chapter. So the first chapter is set in the war-stricken landscape called Turan, and it's called Siren. And it's from the viewpoint of the young girl. The basement smells wet. Other than random flashes of light coming through the small window, it's dark everywhere. I'm squatting on the cold concrete floor under a wooden table, covering my ears with my hands and wondering if our house will still be here tomorrow. Mom and Dad are sitting on chairs a few meters away. They're quiet. I don't like sitting on a chair. The table is like another roof. I told my parents it's like playing house, and they said it was okay. We all do different things when the lights are cut and the air raids begin. It always starts with a siren. This is how the government lets us know we're in danger and we should hurry to our shelters. For most of us, the basement is our shelter, the only place we could survive if they drop a bomb on our house. This morning, the siren sounded at 3:12 a.m. I thought it was my alarm waking me up for school, but when I opened my eyes, the room was dark and the jays weren't squawking outside the windows yet. I pulled the covers over my head, but Mom's voice cut through the air. "Why aren't you up, Lily?" She sounded panicky, like she always does. "Coming," I yelled from under the blanket, trying to loosen my legs as fast as I could. I got out from under the warm covers, stepped on my favorite doll, the one I was playing with the night before, kicked her under the bed without looking down, and stumbled out. Dad was outside waiting for us on the raised stone patio. In the corner of the yard, opposite the pool, steps took us to the basement, an unfinished room, originally for extra storage, with an attached bathroom. But for the past 6 months, it's become our shelter. Mom even put canned food and dry bread in there. Brooklyn. In case we're hungry and the bombing lasts more than the usual 15 minutes. In case. We're always ready for in case. Tonight, the Milky Way looked extra brilliant with the electricity cut off in the city. Its luminous band, like a million bits of crushed diamonds, arched the darkness. Then the anti-missile aircraft made the sky glow the color of blood. As I squat under the table, the sound of the siren stops. The patchy thuds begin. It's the usual. First comes the loud sounds, then the smell of raids. Dad says it's a combination of ozone and cordite. I don't know what those things are. To me, it just smells of war. Then I start praying, or my form of it. I mumble loud enough to cover up the noise outside my head. Dad doesn't hush me, so I assume it's okay to pray when we're down here. I don't know any real prayers, so I've made up my own. It's kind of like begging, actually. Nothing I would want my friends at school to see. When the sun is out and I'm getting ready to go to school, the whole God thing seems silly, just like Dad says. It's only when the raids begin that I believe. I repeat my little prayer over and over again and promise, like I do every night, that I'll never not believe in God. Really, God, I promise I'll never think those awful things about you again. Just let this be over. Please let my family stay safe tonight. I'll be a better girl too, I promise. I'll start finishing my math problems before the day they're due, and I'll set my alarm clock on weekdays because deep down, I actually do know that mom's pet peeve is waking me up for school. If you let me grow up with my parents around, I'll do something good, like become a teacher like Dad. Just please let my family and home be safe. Amen. I know you have to say amen to make all prayers official. It's like sincerely or yours truly at the end of a letter. You need to let God know that it's okay to stop listening to you and start listening to another begging child. There are a lot of us here wanting to make it out of the basement tonight. It's the polite thing to do, really. Then we go into the young woman's chapter, which is set in New Jersey. And this one is called Everydayness and Sewers. I whipped my silk robe around myself and rushed to the stove. Each of the round knobs were lined up at off, and the ignition ports were cold. Where else could that scorching smell be coming from? Milky early rays were just making their way through the windows, finding the sparse lines in my living room. The television, maybe? I put a hand on the back of and around the enclosure. It was cold. Sniffing first the living room air, then the hallway and the bathroom, and finally the bedroom, I surveyed the entire home and came up empty. Nothing was burning, yet that sharp sulfuric electrical odor had roused me from a dead sleep. That was the day everything changed. I'd woken up in that condo for 5 years, but that Thursday, spring morning, a couple weeks after my 29th birthday, I woke up scared, confused, and suspicious, frantically searching for something that I was sure existed. That morning, I didn't know where I was. But I went about the day as if I did, because that was the only way I knew how. Mr. Coffee percolated the powder remnants of beans from Colombia while I inhaled warm water vapors in the shower to cleanse my insides and wash away the uncertainty that was beginning to take root. Before long, dressed in a blouse and a pair of slacks with my wet hair twisted up with a brown clip, I stood by the answering machine sitting on the island separating the kitchen from the living room and played my dead best friend's last message for the 103rd time. I stared beyond the machine at the ether that emanated the ringing voice of Spencer, as clear as though he were standing there, but as always couldn't get past the first 3 words, my not wife. By 7:45, I was at my cubicle, one of 63 gray lidless boxes on our floor. I looked through my emails. The plans for the new development were in. I walked over, retrieved them from our secretary's desk, and carried them through the leaden-hued corridor back to my work area, which seemed to have shrunk over the past few weeks. I seated myself at the desk, unrolled the plans, searched for my paged utilities, looked at the grade of the land, and tried to imagine where the sewers would go. Sewer design. To a very small group of people, or a party crowd for all of 5 minutes, it may seem fascinating, but even to those folks, sewers lose their allure. For me, it took about a year to exhaust my fascination with the underground maze of waste. That's when I realized the single most important point to grasp about designing sewer lines is that the shit must flow downhill. That's all one needs to know. Nothing else matters. Why it goes down and what happens at the end of its journey is not my concern. I only make sure it ends up there, not too fast, not too slow, but at a velocity determined by the masterminds of sewers, at least 2 feet per second. I hadn't acquired much new knowledge on this subject since that fact, And no matter how hard I listened to the news, no one ever made a breakthrough in my field. Sewers had already been mastered.
Just amazing. I know I told you at one point that this book made me sort of long for the days when I taught English, because I read this book about, I guess it was about 2 months ago, and then I skimmed it again. And then like 2 days ago, I read it again. And every time, including now when you just read that first chapter, I see new things every single time, little things that you've planted in there that you might read past the first time, but then once all the pieces of this amazing puzzle come together, you start to go, oh, that's why, that's that doll from so it's just beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
That. Can we talk for a minute before we get more into the nitty gritty, but can you talk to us a little bit about the title of the book? Because I think it's fascinating. I mean, there's a scene in the book that relates to this, and I just want to hear you sort of talk about the almond in the apricot and what that meant to you, and narratively how it sort of helps the story.
I think, so I'd had a different title or no title for a while. And I think I wrote my way into the title chapter, and I'd taken it to my workshop, and we were discussing it. And while we were discussing it, it like all came together that needed to be the title. And so it's kind of a world inside of a world, but it's also like a surprise finding, which I think that the protagonist ends up discovering by the end of the book.
Yeah.
She ends up, not looking for the thing that she ends up finding, I think.
Yeah. It really is the perfect title, which you don't know when you start it's a beautiful sounding title, but it wasn't until I got sort of about 3/4 of the way through the book where you realize that I love a title that speaks to a book in many different ways. And that really does. It's a simple pleasure on one hand. It's like you said, it's a mystery. It's an unexpected find. There's also sort of the notion, they discuss a little bit about that it could be bad for you if you overdo something. Anything that you overdo can be bad for you.
Yes, I found out, I think, while I was like, at some point in revisions, I found out that, if you eat too much of it, it's actually bad for you. It's like a poison. Yeah. So I kind of addressed that in the book a little bit too, between the two kids. So it's like
even how it applies to like grief, because what if you open and what if there's nothing inside? When you've sort of gotten used to finding this surprise inside, then the loss of not finding a surprise is suddenly much more hard to take once you've discovered it, right? Once you've discovered a beautiful friendship, for example, and then it's taken away from you. It's really...
She does crack them open at one point without her friend, that the little girl does. And when she does crack them open without him around, they're empty.
There's nothing there. Yeah.
So they only appear when he's, she's sharing them with him. So
yes, which is so interesting, because that makes me immediately think about this triangle of characters between Spencer and Emma and Peter. And that if you don't have all the pieces in place, the magic is not there. So if the little girl doesn't have her very dear friend with her, the magic of finding the almond in the apricot doesn't work. And in the same way, the magic of her relationship with this man doesn't work without the third piece of the triangle. I found that. Can you talk a little bit about those three and sort of how you...
Yeah, I think even in friendships, relationships sometimes work as a package, right? So you might be three friends who always hang out, and if one of them doesn't hang out and you hang out with that one person, you have nothing to say. I think there was a Seinfeld episode about this, if I'm not wrong, but you just have nothing to talk about. You just can't have that relationship. And I kind of feel like these three kind of the three people, the three characters kind of had that kind of a relationship. Each one gave the other something that only they could give. And they also farmed, I think someone mentioned this, but they farmed out
Yes.
parts of, the things that they didn't want to do. So for example, Peter, whatever things he didn't feel like doing, he would push Emma off and say, go do them with Spencer. So he got that, Spencer took care of that for him. Spencer didn't have to put on any airs when he was with Emma. So he had like that kind of relationship with her where he could really be himself without pretending to be literate, or when he speaks, or dress perfectly or whatever. And I think he in turn challenged Emma in a way that Peter was unable to challenge her.
Definitely. Which left her bored after, when it was just the two of them, just Peter and Emma left. Then
yeah, so when it was the three of them, it just worked perfectly because they each gave each other something. But when one of them went away, when one of them was gone, these two were trying to hold up this three-legged structure with just two legs, because you had one leg gone, and they just kept crumbling. And they really wanted to make it work. There is love between them, but I think that it wasn't enough to keep the relationship going.
No, and that's really quite tragic, because there was love, and it, neither one of them wanted to admit really that with the death of this one friend, that what they had remaining was hard to stand up with the third leg missing, as you said.
And Emma didn't realize that that you could be in a relationship. I don't think she realized that this was missing, and I don't think she realized that you could be in a relationship where you could get all those things from your partner.
Right.
She literally had to learn that.
Like her needs were split between two men instead of finding everything that she needed in one person. Exactly. And it worked because if Spencer was living his life, he was okay. He knew she was safe with Peter and she was fine. Like they could have some space from each other. But yes, his absence. And that's what I think made grief so much more profound in this book, because it's not just the voice on the answering machine and the loss of such a dear friend, but it's what happens to your life afterwards when you try to carry on and you're missing something that was not just so important to you, but that was propping up other parts of your life, including in a way her job. I mean, you just read that amazing chapter about work in sewer, and she becomes much more dissatisfied with everything once this light has been extinguished of this beautiful friend that she had.
Yeah, she had a perfectly what she thought was a perfectly, content life. And then she's bored. She feels like she's in this suburban existence of 9 to 5 and, sameness with the boyfriend, sameness with the job. Everything's the same and mundane,
Yes. And then suddenly the idea of, is this the rest of my life? Is this the rest of my life? Like, is this it? And that's really terrifying. I mean, that's what I kept thinking about the whole time I was reading this book. I just kept thinking about how you made this amazing split between the regular, the mundane, the routine. And then on the flip side of that, the unknown, the inexplicable, the supernatural, the spiritual. I mean, her day job versus what's happening to her at night when she goes to sleep. And I don't want to say dreaming, and I don't want to give any spoilers away either for anyone listening. And as I said, for anyone listening, quick, get on literatibookstore.com and pick up your copy of this if you haven't already. It is a ghost story in some ways, and it's absolutely a page turner, because this desire to find out what the link is between these two worlds that you've established, of this mundane world that is literally about the most human, regular things like commuting and sewers and just the boring routine of life. But then you've got this entire other world, and the reader is sitting there wondering what is how are these two things related? So I know you said you started with those first two chapters, but you're saying that when you started, as far as you knew, Lily could have been a character in the real world, or did you know right away that somehow there was going to be this other element going on of
I did know there was this other magical element going on from the beginning. I mean, I kind of set out to do that. I always knew I wanted to write something with magic in it. I also thought I was going to write a funny novel, and it's not funny. I adore humor.
Right.
I mean, I just adore humor, and I adore, I adore your writing because you do humor so well. So I kind of wanted to do that, but it ended up not being that kind of a book.
There is something wryly funny about shit in sewers. I mean, there is something, she talks about that. Like, there is something funny to me that you have these two things happening to her at the exact same time. You have petty worker disputes and boyfriend problems, but meanwhile, she is dealing with something. And no, it's not haha funny. It's frightening in some moments because she's terrified. She does not know what's happening to her at night. So maybe for context, you should explain a little bit about what is going on, without spoilers, but what's sort of going on with her in the evenings.
Yeah, so every evening she ends up in another place where she's living the life of a young girl who's in this war-stricken, landscape. And she doesn't know what's happening. And then that world kind of, at first she thinks they're nightmares, and then it continues. There's, the nightmares or dreams are sequential. So she starts to wonder if maybe something else is going on. Maybe she's time traveling. So it just becomes like, it's this exploration on her part to try, and she really needs to understand. So she's one of those people that, like, she can't just let it go. She has to understand what's happening. So she starts to try to get answers. Am I going crazy? Can this be explained by, some alternate universe? Am I going to an alternate universe? Is this physics behind it? So she must find an answer. And so she's kind of frustrating that way, I think.
I mean, you get the reader in her shoes. We are also dying to understand what's happening to her. So it's really fascinating that we are so on this journey with her of this mystery and what is going on. And of course she needs to find an answer. Any of us would be desperate to find an answer of why is this happening. What you do, what is so fascinating to me is that she does sort of realize these are not normal dreams. She's like, I know what a dream is. I know what a nightmare is. This is not that. So what is it? And then you do this amazing thing of, you have this sort of not a solid wall between the two worlds, in that things pop up between the two. So there will be some element, for example, an apricot, and sometimes in a very subtle way, she'll think she sees an apricot in the next chapter, but other times there's a mint, and then she actually sees a box of Altoid mint. So it just makes you really curious of what's going on, because and I really thought to myself when I was reading, these things are just popping up, and she's doing this in this amazingly seamless way, where she was just talking about this, and oh my God, here it comes 2 chapters later, and I'm seeing it again. But that must, from the writerly perspective, that must have been very challenging to do, because you have a light touch, you don't overdo it, but you drop in enough of that it's just really intriguing and makes you just turn the page when you're reading, because you just need to understand what this phenomenon is that's happening.
Yeah, I think it was just the worlds bleeding into each other just a little bit. And like you said, I was trying to be very subtle and really hold back. Sometimes I wanted to do more, but I knew I had to hold back because I think if you overdo it, it could end up becoming a problem. But some of that happened, as I just revised and tried to find places where some of it from the beginning was there, like the very beginning few chapters, but then some of the later stuff. And I tried to do it a little bit more as the story progressed, so that as the worlds started to kind of collide, they were also just more elements of one world in the other that would show up.
Yeah. So you described this main character as sort of, frustrated and desperate to find out that she's that kind of person. You have a scientific background. Where did your knowledge of science kind of fit into this book, where you have a character who's desperate to find sort of a scientific explanation for something, goes to scientists in the book? And I thought it was brilliant, because even the scientist was like, when I talk about those things on YouTube, I'm kind of doing that for a popular audience in a way. I can't really give you the answers that you want to hear right now. I mean, how much of your worldview with this scientific background, how much of that sort of came into this character and how you wrote about her curiosity?
Yeah, so I think she's desperate to find a solution, like an answer to what is happening, but her entire belief system revolves around the rational, herself. So this is a problem. But I think what happens when something devastating happens to people, like loss, losing a loved one, it's a really hard thing to grasp. And so even the most rational people start going places they wouldn't otherwise go to.
Right. So,
and I think it's because at some point, science just can't be a match for that kind of emotional turmoil.
Right. So, excuse me. Sorry, I have a bit of a lingering cough here. Can you talk a little bit about her curiosity and the fact that we as readers don't know exactly where Lily is? In terms of like, where are these, dreams taking place? Or not dreams, these episodes.
I left it kind of open. I didn't want to ground it in a specific known place for several reasons. One, to keep the reader, because we don't know if it's an actual place and we don't know if they're dreams. So to keep it kind of open, I wanted to do that. But I also just wanted to do it so the experience felt a little bit more universal for people reading, because I think once you put it in a place that people know and events that people know, it would have given it a different feel. So I specifically kept street names, brand names, song names out of that world. I made sure there were no details in that world, those kinds of details. But I still wanted that world to feel very lush and colorful, and with a lot of sensory details. And I wanted Emma's world that had all the names, all the places, and it was in this concrete world. I wanted that to feel really drab and gray, even though it was intentional. But I did hint with the name Turan. I think I did hint as to where, the place where it's set at. So Turan is a little bit of a play on the word Tehran. It's also Tur is a character and Turan is a region that's mentioned in the Shahnameh, which is a long epic poem by Ferdowsi. And it's also mentioned in ancient religious texts, in Zoroastrian texts, and also if you spell Turan differently, Toran, it means archway or gate. So it's kind of an entryway maybe to another place.
Yeah. Well, I sort of turned into Emma because I got that curiosity. So I was Googling the name. Is it Nima? Is that how you say it? To figure out like what was the origin of the name, because I got so curious. And then I thought, no, I think if Emma doesn't quite know, I think it's okay that I don't quite know. I think the idea is more the feeling of the place and the mountains and the stream and the apricot tree, like just all of that felt so real. But the fact that I couldn't place it on a map kind of helped me a little bit, because it kept it more sort of mysterious. And but you gave me enough. You're right. You had the Holland Tunnel. You had, the street names in New York and the street names in New Jersey. So much was really, as you said, very concrete. But that other world, which wasn't all, it was war torn. It was, a lot of tragedy, but I got such a sense of where it was without being able to place it. Which I
the names that you mentioned, I really worked hard to make sure the names in that other world could be sort of unrecognizable and also short, very short. So they were like Lily, Nima, Mimi. They're all kind of these like super short names, kind of to go with the lack of detail in the other world.
Enough that was familiar that you felt like you knew, like you were like I was worried for these people. I was worried for, are they going to make it to when they left the city? And I did want to say, you had this amazing moment that really, I think I've got the page marked here, or is it I have 2 copies of your book. I'm just saying.
Oh my God.
But you said this amazing thing where they returned to the city, and you said that Dad says it's because people can't stay holed up forever away from it all, that after they leave for a while, after the first few months, people's money ran out and everyone needed to work, needed to go back to school, and most important, needed to live. There was only so long that life could be put on hold. So raids became like car accidents and heart attacks. They were just a thing that happened in life. War couldn't stop people from living. And if it did, if we let it, it would win, he says. And I thought, that is so the kinds of conversations that we've been having the last few months of whatever it is that's sort of tearing your society apart, whatever the tragedies are. At what point do you just say, we have to go back to our life? And I just think what was so interesting was that the life that you created there, without telling us where it was, I really felt like I could smell the smells, and I could see what the streets looked like. Like I had a really strong image, because I think that's what you wanted me to have, because that's what she's experiencing every night when she closes her eyes, the main character.
Yeah.
So I just found that fascinating. How far along in the book were you when Corona happened? I can't remember where your process.
I was done.
Totally done.
I was totally done. I was done, I think like a long time, maybe like 2018. But I did do final edits, just last year. But the premise and everything that happened, yeah,
Did that link to our lockdown occur to you?
Oh, I think about it all the time. Yeah, because it is that it's when these extreme things happen, you still have to do the mundane stuff.
Right.
You still have to live, you still have to go to work. You can only like be in that stress mode for so long.
Yeah.
To go make a living, you have to feed your children. And I think we see it with the pandemic, we're seeing it with the war in Ukraine. It's just how, and it's so weird and kind of horrifying in a way that and I think, for Lily to have to go to school during the day, and then there's like bombs at night, and for Emma to have lost the person that was dearest to her and have to still go work on the sewers,
And there was something about the date nights, for example, and the bringing pizza over, that you really did paint a kind of dismal picture of what is left for her once this amazing man has been taken away from her. Date night, you think, oh, date night. And And it was just like, she's just spacing out and she can't focus and there's no spark anymore, like for her.
No spark. And they really try. She tries to buy him a gift. He tries to buy her physics books. You know, they're trying, but they're both missing. Like, it's just like everything's just not working and missing the mark and just not making anything happen.
Missing the mark, exactly. He came close. Like sometimes he would come very close with getting just the right thing, but yeah, when it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We only have a few more minutes. I swore I wasn't going to do this because we're going to get to questions pretty soon. But for anyone just curious about this, and for any either writers in the crowd or aspiring writers who are listening, I would love to hear about your process, because it's just always endlessly fascinating to me. You were even saying with people who write their first book, like who knows, like we all come at this from such completely different places. I'm really intrigued that you started with those first 2 chapters and that they remained almost intact. What is your process otherwise? You said you didn't outline much for this. Like at what point do you outline, or do you never outline? And what sort of, how do you sit down and do the work?
So for this book, it was like, I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, not that I have much of an idea now, but, you know, at least I understand the process now. But for this, it was just kind of like the first 2 chapters, I don't know what the story is about. I didn't outline. I just went into this dark forest and hoped I could find my way out somehow. And it was a lot of trial and error. And I didn't do an outline, and I would write for 2 months and then not look at it for a year and try again. And because I didn't understand what kind of that this is a marathon, that this is one of those things that you can't expect yourself to be done in 3 months. So I did an outline. I did at some point after I had done like my 3rd or 4th revision, then I I worked backwards and put an outline together just to see the book from like a macro viewpoint.
Yeah.
But for the next book that I'm working on, I was like, I'm not doing it that way anymore. So I did an outline. I tried to study my characters by trying to like really understand like what their backgrounds were and things like that. And I wrote, you know, my first draft. And moving forward, and that's already changing. So moving forward, I'm going to sit down and re-outline again and decide like where it's. I think it's every time I'm going to outline several times with every revision and try to change. Yeah, I think this time I understand the process better. I don't know that it's any easier, but at least I understand what it takes to finish.
Right. I think especially the character study thing. I think that's what I'm about to start writing my 5th book, and I still haven't figured it out. I still do it differently every single time, which is just baffling, because I think I've learned something and then I try that thing for the next book and then it doesn't work for the next book. It's sort of, it's a little frustrating, and it's also, at some point it's kind of refreshing because you just realize each book has its own way of coming into being, and to just sort of surrender to that a little bit. But I do think that the very like in-depth character study is a great way to start, because that work has to get done, right? And so I'm going to try to front end that more with my next book. See if that'll work a little bit better.
Yeah, that's what I tried to do. Although already like I'm mixing like 2 of my characters. So there goes that character study. But you know, it's it's a very humbling process.
It certainly is. I've thrown entire books away and had to start over again. I just want to mention to John that if we have any questions, great, pop on and give them to us, and just cut me off anytime. And we can jump in with those, but otherwise we will just keep talking in the meantime. What about the weaving of these 2 character story in terms of the process? Did you, were there times when you got very Lily heavy and had to go back and sort of bolster the Emma chapters, or like, how did that balance work? Because they're very well balanced. I mean,
actually, yeah, I just kept flipping back and forth, and it kind of like that part was probably one of the easier parts of it, where
Okay.
things just kind of fell into place. And I tried to keep the Lily chapters kind of short, so they felt dreamlike, and put them in the present tense, first person present tense. So it had that dream feeling. And with the other chapters, I went longer, and I just, but it was funny because people would ask me, they're like, did you write them separately and then put them together? Did you? But I didn't. I just kind of just went back and forth, back and forth. At some point, I think I separated the pages just to make sure each one had a narrative arc. But overall,
That makes sense to me because like they feed each other. Like the Lily chapters really drive Emma in the next section. So I can see how, I mean, that just sounds so challenging to me, but I can see why it wouldn't really have worked for you to write all of one and all of the other.
I don't think that would have worked. I think it was a good idea to kind of see them separately just to make sure that they made sense. But again, it was a very like macro view. It was like getting into the nitty-gritty.
So are you a 8-hour a day person? Are you a 4-hour a day person? Are you a morning writer, an evening writer? Like, do you have a routine?
No, I'm not an 8-hour writer or person. I can at most do like, unless if I'm at a writer's residency, I can do like 8 hours a day, but it's a whole different experience. It's like an immersion program, and it's wonderful. There's all this energy. But in my own setting, in my own home and life, I can probably do an hour to 2 a day. I need to feel that I have more time than that, but in reality, I can't do more than an hour or 2 a day. I'm also extremely full, so it's very hard for me to put myself in the chair and write. And I'm also a freelance writer, so I have to write other things to make a living. So that makes it more challenging. I am a morning writer, but for the last book that I was working, somehow afternoons were working out better. So I don't know, but definitely not evening or night. Like I have no energy at that point.
Yeah. Mornings are always good. But I also just find that some days are better than other days. And it also depends sort of on what part of the process you're in. Are you creating or editing, which is a very different, I think rewriting is so different from writing, like for me.
Yeah. I love that part where you get to make things pretty. That's one of my favorite parts of it, is when you can go back. Now you have things in place and you can go back and just like, just change sentences and words and just make them pop. And I think that's so much fun.
That's where I go back and I make them funny. That's my favorite part. I might as well do best to our wonderful audience. I'm so sorry. I am recovering from COVID. In case you cannot tell, I apologize. I barely coughed all day. And then all of a sudden, sorry, I really apologize.
Very good for someone recovering from COVID.
Thank you. But yes, I love that part of going in at the end and I've got the pieces in place and then looking at the dialogue and finding ways to just pump up the dialogue and throw a joke in and,
that's the fun part. That's what I used to think writing was about, but it's not. That's only a small part of it.
No, it's so funny. It's so much about building like a structure that's going to hold up the story.
Yeah.
In the way that particular story needs to be held up because they're all different.
Yeah, and then you mess with one thing and then the whole book falls apart. That's the thing that's like mind-blowing to me.
Me too. You were talking about your favorite part. That's my least favorite part. You pull a thread and it's the whole thing.
The whole thing falls apart and you're like, now I don't know what to. That's where I am with the next one. I like pulled one thread and it's like, oh.
And you think I broke the book. I broke it. I broke my book. But then you can put it back together again. You just have to. It's just work. It's like anything else. Like that's the thing that's really like been the most eye-opening for me is that, yes, it's great when a good idea comes to you, but it never changes the fact that it is work. It is hours working, editing, rewriting, and it's the courage to say, this isn't working. This isn't working. And like, I have to break my book and in order for it to work.
Yeah. It's hard. It's hard to do that. And like you said, it takes courage to break it because you really want something to work. You really had this brilliant idea and you want to shove it in there somehow, some way, and it's just not working. Then you have to take it out. Yeah.
But that's why you said it's a marathon. It is an endurance sport. Like, you have to stick with it.
Yeah.
And
I was so naive when I started. I was like, 3 months. 3 months I can have a book going. I don't know why it takes everybody so long, but
yeah. I mean, I think a year to a year and a half is fast.
It's very fast. Yeah.
And I mean, if you end up throwing an entire book away, which I've done, and starting the whole story over again from scratch, add another year to that. But it's fun.
Part of the process is doing that. It's like doing the homework for it.
Yes. And it is so hard. And somebody said, oh, everybody hates writing. And there are moments, but honestly, is there anything better either? Like, to be able to create a story like this, to be able to move people emotionally like this, and to take them on this trip, like this amazing trippy trip that you take us on, where we have to figure out what on earth is going on in this woman's life. And then honestly, it's goosebump inducing the way you make it all come together in the end. I mean, it really is. And I have to say, this is such a satisfying book to finish, because a few pieces come together at the end where you just go, oh, yes. Like, yes, it feels very like it feels victorious.
Oh, thank you.
Support Literati. Definitely purchase I'm so sorry, John. I thought I would make it, and then I started coughing.
Please, you're doing Herculean effort just being with us here tonight. We so appreciate it.
It's a joy to talk about such a beautiful book, and I really congratulate you, Sara. It's so good. It's just wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Amy.
Excuse me.
Thank you both.
John. It was wonderful being here, and thank you, Literati, for having us.
Of course, it's our pleasure. I think this is a lovely note to end on. Yes, you can buy the book at the store. There's a link in the chat. There's a link below on YouTube if you're watching us there. Sara and Amy, we hope to have you both in the store, in person, for your next events. But thank you for your time this evening on At Home with Literati. We hope you continue to be well. We look forward to having you in the store soon. And to all of our viewers at home, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you at the next event. Have a great night, everybody. Take care.
Good night.